Hello there, welcome to Remote SSH video part 2, probably about 5-10 years on from when it was first done. I just wanted to catch up and explain some of these new changes I've done on the plugin. So I'm about to roll out a whole heap of new changes, and I wanted to talk through what it's doing at the moment. There's a lot of new stuff. So, um, what I've decided to do is there's a problem with UTF-8 file names initially reported on the plugin, and this led to an update in the entire technology or the version of Ganymede or Ganymede Java source file as such. So that got updated to the latest version, which then broke what I had originally written. So out of it came a whole heap of new work, which is all this SSHUtil service, which you don't actually have to use. I think I started off with that originally, and you could just send usernames and passwords and commands and stuff to it, and SE copy and stuff like that. So I've moved away from that now, and we've now got an SSHUtil, which is the object that gets returned by the initialization process through the service, and then you can reuse the service or just call SSHUtil. So in this example, we are typically executing something on the remote host with that server being the connection, username and password. You can initialize it in different ways, including rather than password, a key and the key password. And you can also configure it via this. So typically this is the remote SSH one. But you can create your own config block. So if I've had multiple SSH configs, and when you're calling it, you can decide which config file it uses. So if you use the manual method of calling the actual SSHUtil, you can set the config variable to be whichever one, and then when I do initialize, because everything is set inside this config file for it to work, it will just do the command. So we can do another one here, and I'll show you. And we call that 2. Yeah. Spell the problem there. That's not going to exist, is it? That's 3. Don't delete it. Anyhow, I wanted to talk through what has changed. I've just sort of got carried away again. Right. So, and anyhow, so if you had different blocks of SSH configurations, you could literally configure them like this in your config, and then you can call them up using the config variable and then running that and doing whatever you need to do. So I want to talk through what we've done. So first of all, you've got quite a few commands, and in the actual remote SSH, I'd suggest you go to this, which will also update this. I'm going to probably label it better, the actual object, and that gives you a rundown of what you can and can't do with the SSHUtil, and there's going to be loads of new ones added on to this with what you can do, and we'll see them in a minute. So first, I'm going to quickly walk through this, and then we're going to go through the screen and we're going to see the output. So first of all, I'm getting to initialize as me, log in. making a directory in temp backup test new, make it, and this is going off the remote host, which is this same host. And use a single instance basically defines whether I'm going to run this command and then finish it. If it's true, then it just runs a command and ends the connection. So we want this to be false because we were reusing this connection in this instance. So we're making loads of new directories, and if we go into our temp rm-rf temp v1 okay, they're gone. And then rm-rf temp remote star temp backup. So all of this stuff is going to go. So we've got all of this stuff that it's doing, rm temp kiss test star.txt, so they can all go. And so that's the only thing left with tests now inside our temp folder. So the entire thing is based on this system now making loads of directories and copying files from here to there, attempting for it to be a remote host, which is itself. So it's made another directory then, and it also, so these are all execute commands where it echoes things into files or makes directories. You don't have to use execute to make directories. There are specific commands, and you can see it in a minute. Read remote file is like a cat of the file. These two, I think, are similar. So where it's sometimes SSHUtil service, I've given examples, and sometimes SSHUtil. So it's telling you the same thing, but with SSHUtil service, you pass in the original object every time you call it, because it's not thread safe. So write file is where it puts this file from this local folder into this remote folder, make DIRs, which is a recursive, so whatever we've set it goes off and does it all the way. You need to wrap it around the try and catch because these can throw exceptions if there are problems. Another way of writing file, it's the same as that without the SSHUtil service. Write file with name is slightly different because we take tempkisscat this file and we call it aha1 on the other side, so it's a totally different name from where it started on the local host. Put file is like write file. There's no difference between those. There are variations in the way the methods in the background actually do the work. So in sorry, you'd have to look through on here. And the way it does this buffering is slightly different between put file and write file, and you'd have to look through it and understand what's different about it. But they both work, so I left different ways just in case there are problems. Put files is where you put a list of files, and it's literally a list of local files in a string array of lists as such that you send in, and a remote folder it goes to, and they all get copied over to there. Same thing, but without the util service. Get file gets the remote file and puts it onto the local directory. So you'd have to follow the example to understand it, but that's the remote file going to the local directory. Get files gets remote files, these remote files, and copies to the local directory. Same thing without the util service. File exists tells you if the file exists on the remote side. If it's valid, it's a valid file. Remote file size gives you the actual file size. Delete remote file will delete the file for you. Create remote DIRs is by you suggesting create these folders, and it makes it recursively for you. It's like make DIRs. Is directory confirms if it's a directory or if it's a folder. Change the CD if you need to change it, if you're doing SSH scripting. List files gives you back a list of files in that directory with the true, makes it recursive, otherwise it's just that directory itself. There is like list files, list names is like list files, get files is like list files, file names, they're all pretty much the same. I think they are all the same. It's called different names. And obviously if the true there means it's recursive and it goes off and finds any other files in any recursive folders. rmdir, you need to wrap it around and try and catch, because again, if it causes problems and you hit a folder that's got other things in it, it will this will delete 10 remote 1, 2, 3. It will remote 3, but it will stop and that won't do 2. Whereas if this recursive is recursive, this is a recursive RM and it will go 5, 4, 3 remote, and if there's nothing left in remote, remove remote, and then create a throw error message at temp because the file's in temp. Just recursively trying to delete all the empty folders backwards. Makes a dir, specific dir, list files. Now we get onto the thing that I've just shown you, which is the customized configuration variable that you have in your config.groovy. This is obviously Grails 2. On Grails 3 is your application.groovy or whatever. It's going to be the same thing. And obviously the commands that you want to run for that specific SSHUtil object that you've got at the time. Same thing again. This gives you the modification date and time, which is in date format. Sets the modification date, so you can actually literally update the date and time of the file, and it returns the modification date and time again of that file onto our screen to a new date that we've defined it. It's just another test. I think we don't need this one. Get file permission gives you the permission in human readable format like 755, 644. Get permission gives you RWX, RX stuff. Get file user ID gives you the user ID of the underlying user that owns the file. Set file permission allows you to update the permission of the file to be whatever you want it to be. Get permission gets it for us again, and I can actually write a set user ID as well. I'll write that in before I release it. Get permission, get octal permission, get decimal permission, get binary permission, set file permission as a string with the 0 in front of it if you need it that way. And then we get into more enhanced, advanced topics now, which is running things through the task executor that I've introduced, the thread executor, sorry, should I say, which allows you to restrict or limit how many SSH connections you want to have at any one point going out of your Grails box. It's going to be very difficult to base it on remote host names or anything, but it's just the specific threaded pool which are limited to how many can be run. And there are two ways of doing it. One is to execute, and this is the very manual way of doing it, which you call SSH executor, which is defined at the top there. And this is the other way, and we'll get to that in a minute. So these are all thread safe methods of doing it, and it will work absolutely fine. Whilst we got all that, we could actually run a disconnect over there, and this will all still work. So as you can see, we've got a new object in here going off. This is another method of using the util service, which gets rid of some of the clunkiness of all this. This is another way of setting a priority, because you can have them on priority as well for it to run it in a specific priority if the thread executor is busy with the amount of concurrent sessions that you've defined in your config file. This shows us if we do a disconnect here. Oh yeah, we move things around, sorry. Because I'll have to look at this again. So anyhow, when you've got the things inside the closure going off like this with a new SSHUtil, you can run the disconnect and everything's fine. The reason why it's appeared without a new object is because it's in the closure that's using the same variable that's on the page. So if I made it call it 1 or something else, maybe I should do that to make it look better. Right. So this is basically all thread safe methods, and there are different ways of doing the same thing basically. Then I wanted to show you a further advanced way of doing it, which is to have your task, but then schedule it 10 seconds in 10 seconds time. And it's using scheduled SSH executor, or 25 seconds time. In 25 seconds after we've done all of our work, then we'll get some folders appearing in this folder here. And these methods aren't thread safe, so I've kind of kept them there, and I've kept the methods there because so long as you've got your main primary, so at the moment those unsafe thread ones, once I've initiated the connection initially at the top of the page, which was here to the SSH server, all the rest of it are used that same connection to do all the work so far. So when we've reached all of this, is obviously its own thread now. This is its own thread doing new things. But when we reached all of these runnables, they go off, and they again, depending on whether the thread executor is available or not. And I don't think this is. It might be alright. But basically, it will be waiting if the queue's already filled with other SSH jobs. But by the time it hits, so all of this is again outside of our current controller thread. Even though you know, this looks confusing, and I'll update it. But when we get to this unsafe stuff, the not thread safe methods, what we're actually doing is we're reusing the current SSH connection from the very top of the page. And that initial connection is then running these new commands, which is to create this folder. And then we've tried to do a disconnect, but we've tried to grab the connection of the current existing connection before we run the disconnect. And then we've tried to run another command altogether using the SSHUtil, but that fails because it's already disconnected. And then I've tried to hack it to say, well, I've added another method to use existing connection. Well, I'm going to keep it in there, but the reason all I was doing was testing, and again, this also doesn't get created. So basically, because we've disconnected the SSH connection in our main primary controller at the time, none of these other threaded jobs can run, because within the SSHUtil class, SSH executor, which is in runnable. If there's a connection, we set the SSHUtil connection to that connection, and this is what kind of hacks it or tricks it to work when we get a closure with information. That's bound to the non-fed methods. So that was the walkthrough. Now let's see the product working or failing, whichever way it goes. Here we go. We've got a working product, and if we we've got one of the folders, and if we wait for this now, we should get another folder after the 25 seconds is up. There we go, there's 97. So that was a scheduled task. So the scheduled tasks are kind of put here, but they don't produce anything because they're going off in a thread, and it's not really aware of what the hell's going on with it anymore at that point. These are some of the outputs of some of the calls that's been made. So the permissions, but you can see the permission was 644. Here's the permissions. That's the user ID. Then we've made it to 755. You can see here it's become 755. And that's the binary and octal and all the rest of it for that 755. And then 644 again, as you can see there. And this is where we, what I was trying to do was run a disconnect and then do another within the close. I think, no, that's fine actually. Look, if we look through what I was trying to explain, I go a bit slower and it will make sense. So in this block, I've run a disconnect and it's for SSHUtil and it's executed that command and then it's done the chmod and that's result 2 and that's result 2 here. So that's got executed and the disconnect's been run, but then I've run get the file permissions again and it's given me the file permissions. And all I was trying to say was that I think it's because I've reused the variable on the page, and if I correct it like this one, everything will be fine. But because of that, I didn't want people to think, oh, well, why is it disconnected and why is it working there? Anyhow, some of the other stuff, and I should show you the other stuff working. You'd have to follow what the crazy SSH script is doing that I've written. It's just tests basically. Anyhow, I think that wraps up the video. I will update the rest of the documentation. I'll just finish off this video as a guide for you guys to be able to get around. So literally refer to what will be here, which is the documentation, this thing that I'm writing at the moment. No, it's in the other branch, it's in the Grails 3 branch, but I'm updating it so that it's got the release 14 documentation and then how to use the older versions, and this SSHUtil methods and how to use is important to figure out how to get file size and, you know, set the permission and set the user and all those crazy wonderful things that you want to do remotely from your SSH that you wasn't able to do before. Thank you very much. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Bye bye.